Welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast, where leaders of all sorts come to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways, because we know that when a leader gets better, everyone wins. I'm your host, Whitney Putnam, and before we jump in, I wanted to let you know that the summit is just around the corner. We are so excited. If you've gone, you know that the summit is the can't miss leadership event of the year. And this summer, we have some amazing speakers lined up. We're going to hear from the legendary Nick Saban, former head coach of Alabama's Crimson Tide football team. We're going to hear from Christine Kane, the founder of the A21 Project, and one of the most passionate and inspiring people I have ever heard. And you'll hear from John Acuff, who is going to ignite you to kickstart remarkable in your life. You're going to learn, you're going to be challenged, and you're going to be inspired. To get your very best price on the summit, get your tickets today at globalleadership.org/summit. That's globalleadership.org/summit. So back to today's episode. This is a second part conversation that GLN President and CEO David Ashcraft recently had with Les McKeown. For a brief refresher, if you didn't listen to part one, and we highly encourage you to go take a listen, Les is the founder and CEO of Predictable Success. He's also a serial entrepreneur and author. He wrote Predictable Success, Getting Your Organization on the Growth Track and Keeping It There. Personally, part one and part two of this conversation is really something I'm diving into with my team at the GLN. It hits the pain points that many of us feel as leaders and provides common language for us to process what we experience on teams and organizations that we're in. I highly recommend sending this on to the people in your life, leading and maybe giving them a call afterwards to see how they are processing the conversation. So go ahead, send this to a friend or a teammate, and let's finish listening to the rest of Les and David's conversation about predictable success.
So let's say you get through Whitewater, and then the next stage, you call it predictable success. And so what does that even mean, predictable success?
Well, Jeff Immelt, who had the poison chalice of taking over from Jack Welch at GE when Welch had decades of being feted as one of the greatest leaders that we've ever seen. Now, revisionist history has changed a whole bunch of stuff, but one thing's for sure: at the point when Jeff Immelt moved into the CEO role, he had a business in GE that he believed was in predictable success, and for a little while it still was. But anyway, he said something that I use as a quote in the book. He says, "When I put my foot on the gas pedal, this car goes forward." And that's what predictable success feels like. You're in control of what's happening. Now, I'm excluding external black swans, right? Every business and church that was in predictable success got hit by COVID, got hit by the 2008 crisis. But as far as what is under your control, you get the results that you're looking for. And the metaphor that I've used that people have, I think, found most helpful is growing in fun is sort of like trying to get to the top of a big building by running up the fire escapes, up the stairs, and you can get maybe 10 flights and then you're done, you're pooped, right? When you're in predictable success, it's like you've got an elevator. You walk over, press the button, and it takes time, but you get to the floor that you're aiming for. Whitewater is about building the elevator. That's the thing. You've built this building. You built it with stairs during fun. You've got to take time to build a machine that will get you the ability to scale. That's what you've got in predictable success. So to take it into the church world, you've maybe got a couple of locations and they're going quite well. You hit Whitewater. You've really got to work out, how do we do new openings? How do we teach a new worship pastor our way of doing worship? How do we codify all of this? Once you get that together, you can do your 5th location, your 6th location without the stress of having to reinvent it every time. Now, that's different.
How's that different less than momentum? When you get to predictable success, is that momentum, or is that a word that often is used for where you are without understanding fully your model? But would people say, "Oh, we've got momentum now"?
Oh, you can get momentum in fun. You can get a lot of momentum. You can get momentum in any stage. You can get a little, anybody who actually has canoed, if that's a verb, in whitewater will know there can be a lot of momentum in even in whitewater.
Yeah.
What this is much more about control.
Yeah.
Because actually being in control of the speed of growth becomes a key issue. One of the things that whitewater most tests is the ability of a leader to say no. What's really powered growth through fun is saying yes to everything and somehow finding a way to do it. And I'm not saying that with a sort of sense of, oh, isn't that cute? And, when we grow up, we'll do things. But that is, in fact, what you have to do in fun. If you don't do that, you'll fall back into early struggle. That is a muscle you've got to learn. Say yes, work it out later. But then you've got on the what got me here won't get me there. In whitewater, you're learning to say, what do I have to say no to? I can't say yes to everything. I shouldn't say yes to everything. I'll kill us, right? So learning to say no, then you can go back to saying yes, but you're in charge of the scale of the momentum. When you see you got to pull back a little bit, you can do that. When you can see what you want to rush forward into a new market, say, then you can do that. So being in control of that momentum. I've recently got into F1, Formula One, watching it, obviously. And that's momentum, but that's control. If you're going to win, you're in control, right? It's when you lose control, you're not going to finish the race.
That's good. Now, you talked about this being an arc, and so you can hit predictable success, but there's no guarantee you're going to stay there. And so you've got a couple more stages. Describe those stages on the other side of predictable success.
Yeah, so we get into predictable success. It's the top of the arc. But what's important to recognize is that it's not as if you get there and you sort of stick rigidly pointing, due north. There's a constant pull back towards whitewater. So every entrepreneurial thought, every new thing, every book you read, every workshop you go to is pulling you back towards the fun. Just let's upend everything and da, 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 da. And the discipline is what's preventing us from doing that. We want to keep fresh. We want to, be entrepreneurial, but we don't want to go back into whitewater. But there's an equally and in fact more powerful pull towards the decline stage. Now, where does that come from? Where it comes from is what we did that got us this new success was putting systems and process in place. So if that's done that wonderful thing that's now enabling us to scale, open 3-4 new locations, triple our congregation, whatever it is. Hey, wasn't that good? It was painful. I didn't like it at the time, but apparently systems and processes are fantastic. So let's get more. And we become over-processed. So whitewater, we had to solve the problem that we're under-processed. If we're not careful, we begin to fall into the decline stage. And the first of the decline stages I call treadmill. And it's just the mirror opposite of whitewater. Whitewater under-processed, we need to put systems and processes in place. Treadmill over-processed, we need to lift our foot from the brake pedal, which is really what, too many systems and processes are doing. And we'll all have seen it. We'll all have worked in organizations where we just, we get to the point where we're filling in checklists and we're thinking, remind me, why am I doing this again? What does this achieve? The processes themselves have become more important than what they're supposed to deliver. Now, that's a natural stage to fall into, and every growing organization falls into treadmill for a while. What's important is what we do about it. What we want.
Is that the biggest sign you're in treadmill is you've forgotten the why? Because I've been around organizations where I'll go to one location and they fully get it, they're humming, and then I'll go to another location. And usually it seems like it's a generation or two removed from the founding. And so they're following all the procedures, but there's no life there because they don't know why. But is that one of the indicators you're in treadmill?
Very much so. If anybody's looking around and thinking, can anybody tell me where this came from? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
The older of our listeners will remember a guy called Zig Ziglar. The younger of our folks will think it's a cool name, but won't remember him. And Zig told a great story about, and I'll shorthand this really quickly, about this newly married guy. And one thing that he really wanted was his wife. He wanted her to learn how to make roast beef the way his wife's mom did because he loved this and he wanted this on Sundays. So she goes off, starts cooking it and repeating what she sees her mom do. And he sees at one point she's cutting both ends of the slice of beef before she puts it in the oven. And he asks her, "Why do you do that?" And he says, I don't know. That's what Mom does it all the time. I'll ask her next time. Anyway, next time she asks Mom, and she says, "What? You're still doing that?" "I only did that because we didn't have a pan big enough for the slice of beef. That was the only reason I did." I mean, that's the world that we get into. And the problem is this, as you say, in most organizations, for-profit churches, whatever, this doesn't happen like kaboom everywhere. It just creeps in somewhere, but it's a little bit like arthritis. Once it starts, if you don't bring the right treatment to bear, it'll begin to really just spread through the whole of the organization. And that's when it's really problematic. Because if we don't stop the spread of it, what'll happen is we'll fall into the second of the decline stages, which is, remember, we had fun in the growth side. This I call the big rut, and it's like the mirror image of fun. Just like fun was, coming up the growth side, this is going down the roller coaster because now we're over-processed and we like it like this. We don't want change.
So you don't have to think at all. You just follow the manual is kind of what you're saying.
Right. And, customers, congregations, anything like that, you're just a pain in the neck, let's be honest. I say this all the time, and I don't think I really mean it, but it's just a easy example. Just go to the local DMV. I mean, that's typically a place where the process will get you. You'll go in there thinking you're coming out with, a new number plate, but you're not. There's something you didn't fill in. There's something that you've forgotten, and you'll be reminded very quickly.
It's funny you say that, Les, because I just had to go in to get my real ID. And I read an article saying that the real ID is forcing everybody to go to the one place they hate the most on earth, which is the DMV. And that was very true. And it was about a painful 4 or 5 hour procedure.
It really is tough.
But yeah, that's very true.
And that's a classic example of being in the big rut. And unfortunately, and I say this with love, in the church world, a lot of the larger denominations in particular have found themselves in the big rut. It's just that we're doing this because we've always done it that way, and we are not going to change. And in fact, if we do try to change, people will be up in arms because the lack of change is attractive in some ways. Everything is absolutely familiar and exactly the same.
So Les, is it any different in business? Like would a restaurant, would a clothing store, would a hardware store, can they fall into that same trap?
Absolutely. Again, don't forget, I wrote all of this in the business context originally. Just to be technical about it for a moment or two, obviously, the larger the organization, the longer they can stay in the big rut. If you've got like a 2, 3, 4, 5 person, 2, 3, 4, 5 location restaurant or a chain of restaurants, they can easily fall into the big rut. And many of us will have seen them, they just, a steakhouse that just nothing ever changes, but they can't last that long because the consumer will move somewhere else.
Yeah. So just real quickly, what's the next stage then after the big rut?
I call it death rattle, and it's the mirror image of early struggle. Early struggle, we're getting born. Death rattle, we're dying. So it looks like something's happening, but either somebody's buying it to reinvent it completely, or we're just selling the name. There's just we see it out of the corner of our eye, but it's the end of that thing. It's going to move on. Now, you can have organizations, like I say this with some hesitancy, I believe it to be true. Client that I've worked with for a long time, Harvard University, has been in the big rut for a long, long, long time. But they've got, I think the last time I looked, $40-something billion. As we're currently talking, their world is changing a lot. But they were protected for decades because of the fact that they were very, very well funded. Yeah. And there are a lot of big multinational corporations, incredibly well funded. They're not going to go away anywhere soon, but they're on a long, slow decline into irrelevancy.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Case. I'm the content producer for the Global Leadership Podcast. Whether you're leading a team, a classroom, a business, or your home, the Global Leadership Summit is designed just for you. It is the place where leaders show up to learn, to grow, and to lead with renewed courage. Buy your ticket before July 16th and lock in the lowest price. Plus, you can receive free access to Juliet Funt's powerful course, A Minute to Think. You know, one of the things that I love about the summit is every time I attend, I get these reminders of how much leadership matters and how much my leadership matters. We don't all lead with the same platform as everybody we see on the stage, but the great thing about the GLN is we always get reminded that leadership is influence and everybody has influence. So I get these reminders that my leadership is important, and I also get the tools to improve. So I hope you show up this August. You can go to www.globalleadership.org/summit. Join the movement with everybody else. See you there.
So Les, the first time I think I contacted you at LCBC was we were trying to figure out as a team, are we in Whitewater? Are we in Treadmill? And there was kind of a debate on staff of where we were. We were still growing and doing well, but it just something wasn't right. And so you came in, and if you find yourself in Treadmill, or worse yet, the big rut or even the death rattle, one, let me just say, what are the percentage of people that can pull out of the death rattle? Is it similar to starting an organization? Is it 20%, or have you ever thought?
Once you're in death rattle, to borrow from my Calvinist friends, the slate has been written on. It's done.
Yeah.
I used to say, so in Treadmill, it's senior leadership's choice. That's all reversible in Treadmill. So you want to take Treadmill as being, it's part of the table stakes for staying vibrant, is that we can overcook this maybe. So, again, to come back to the church world, we can get a bit too cookie cutter about being in control of our growth. So we're putting a stamp on a new location that really is too much. We should be backing off, letting them experiment a bit more. So it's part of the table stakes for growing, is that we'll push into Treadmill occasionally. But what we've got to do is then reverse it when we see it. Once you get into the big rut, I used to say there was no way out. That's not quite true. But one of the definitions of being in the big rut is the organization has lost the ability to self-diagnose. So it's not going to see the need to change. And I get hauled into talk to boards in big rut, and I describe that experience in the book in the appropriate chapter. But one of my first experiences of being brought by someone else who could see that they needed help. And every time I'm sitting there and these people are looking at me like I'm a Martian, like I'm talking gibberish, like
They don't even know it.
We're an incredible organization.
Wow.
Everybody, right? So for it to change in the big rut, it usually needs a complete decapitation of the senior leadership, because they want it usually the way it's there, the way it is at that point.
Interesting. So, my sense, Les, is that at least if you're in that stage, you almost go back to the restart button and you start back over. Is that kind of the way you would?
Yeah, that's the most frequent way to rejuvenate what's happening. Is it's really got to go and be restarted. And usually what happens is the going means a breaking up into parts, some of which will just never come back, and some will start again as something new. And it's no surprise that a lot of breakaway churches start from people who leave big rut churches and start something new, because they see that they need to rejuvenate something.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think one of the things you've also said, Les, is the bigger the organization gets, different departments can be in different stages. And so it's not like the entire organization is moving at the same pace, but it can be varied internally.
Yes, and one of the difficulties with, one of the challenges of leading a large organization is you're probably, as a senior leader, going to be, totally understandably, you're going to make the assumption that most or all of the organization is in the same stage as the part of it that you have most direct connection with, which is usually the legacy, oldest or biggest part of the organization. And then what happens is there's a natural presumption, whether you use any of my terminology or not, you may be thinking as a leader just in terms of culture, of standard operating processes, of ways of doing things. You sort of assume what I see in the bit that I have most involvement with is how all of the rest of the organization should be working. And that's not quite right. We do want to bring those parts that are on the decline stage back. You'd want to reach out and do something, intervene, and get them back to predictable success if possible. But those smaller parts that are on their growth journey, the last thing you want to do is try to reach out and haul those from, the early fun stage into predictable success by throwing them all of the systems and processes that you've worked at all of this time, because you'll kill it. Right.
Well, what's interesting is people that are on the old side look at the ones in the new side having fun, and they're going, "Wait a minute, why do they get to have fun, and why don't we? Or they should be where we are." So
enormous conflict, and in the for-profit world, that conflict usually, but it comes out and it's clear. Sometimes it's a little bit more suppressed in the church world, where the folks in the fun stage are looking at what they think, these fuddy-duddies, they know nothing, and we almost need to disassociate ourselves, and let's get our own little mini branding, use different colors, whatever that may be. It's understandable. And then, as you say, and look on the other side of the telescope, the folks who've been around for quite a while, maybe pushing more towards the decline stage, they just think these kids they're just full of it. There's nothing to it. There's no substance. And they forget that that's where they came from and that's where they started. So shared vocabulary can be a very, very powerful tool in managing on that. As I think you've discovered, it's just having the ability for 3 or 4 different people who are at different stages in the organization to actually talk to each other about, that's a treadmill-y type of thing. This is a bit too white-watery. Oh, it's your fun talking. Shared vocabulary can be very, very useful.
And Les, one other thing I'll just ask you, it's my argument, and I've never asked you this before, but an organization, I think, can go through that arc multiple times. I feel like as we grew at LCBC, we were going through whitewater. I would say we went through it 6 or 7 times, and we kind of figured it out. We got into predictable success, and it sucked us back down. And so as you continue to grow, you can go through that whole stage or process multiple times, I would argue.
It's the key difference in that organizational life cycle that we've been talking about today, between that and the human life cycle, is we don't get to do that, right? I'm proof positive here. There's a linear path through the aging process. We can slow it a little bit. And a lot of people are investing trillions of dollars right now to try to reverse it. We ain't there yet. But organizations move continuously, constantly being pulled from one part to another. And you're absolutely right. You can bounce back in and then back up again and then back down and then up again.
So Les, one last question. You, as a consultant, you come into organizations that are trying to figure out where they are in this process. What's the number one frustration, or what are some of the biggest frustrations you have with leaders when you're trying to guide them wherever they happen to be on that journey? What is it that frustrates you most with leaders? Is it that they won't recognize where they truly are? Is it that they won't take the steps they need to change themselves? Or is there one thing or several things you go, man, this just drives me crazy. If they just get this, we would be able to move forward.
Yeah, there are 2 specific things which I'll share with you very directly in a second or two, but I want to preface it by saying, and this is going to sound a little bit sugary, but I'll say it nonetheless. I do what I do because I love it, and it's not when I encounter these things, I'm not sitting thinking, I'm thinking that's what I'm here to help with. So I don't want what I'm about to say to sound like I'm being judgmental, because I'm not. It's not at all. And the 2 things are this: one is just not realizing how strong the synapses are that get built in the fun stage about what you do that causes success. That whenever we're pulling a small team out of early struggle and we get into fun, we start to have that early success, it hardwires our brain. Synapses they're sort of like, they're welded in place, that the way that we succeed is to do the things that we did during fun. And that's typically, I'm shorthanding it a lot here, say yes and make it happen. Say yes and make it happen. And we'll do extraordinary things if we keep doing that. So not realizing that that's become part of my DNA as a leader. And then secondly, not realizing that what's coming next requires a whole different toolkit. And that toolkit, this is the part that's really hard. It can't be built on that foundation. You can't say, we're going to keep saying yes to everything and somehow do it, and I'm going to put more stuff on top of that as a leader that will take us to predictable success. Again, for our slightly older listeners and viewers, years ago, everybody got completely bowled over by the fact that Tiger Woods went off to completely reconstruct his swing. Completely. He took 2 years in the wilderness. And at that time, he was the most dominant player in the world by a long way. But what he recognized was he hadn't got a completely repeatable, scalable swing. And he went off, spent just over 18 months, almost 2 years, got himself completely rewired, came back, and then we all thought he was great. He was late fun back then. He came back, went into predictable success. Now if we push the analogy, he had a big run of his own. But boy, that reworking of the swing wasn't building on what he had before. He took it right back and rebuilt it. And that need in Whitewater as a leader to say, what's being asked of me is not to build on top of what I had. It doesn't mean dumping everything. But that fun mentality of just say yes and somehow make it happen, I have to let that go. I've got to learn that ability to say no to things and embrace delivering absolute excellence on the stuff that I've selected to us to focus on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that can happen when you're in predictable success. It also can be real helpful if a leader finds themselves in a crisis mode where they're just not sure what to do in the organization. Part of it seems like what you're saying, Les, is identify where you are even on this journey. And as you identify where you are along the journey, it helps you know what steps to take to get out of that spot or to move the organization forward.
Yeah, that leading in crisis aspect of things, the last decade, 12 years have been an interesting exposure to a lot of that. And one of the things that I've discovered is when you're faced with a crisis, if as best you can see, it's not existential to the organization, then you need to scratch your leadership itch. You need to go to your instincts and do what your instincts tell you to do. If you're facing a crisis, the threat of which is big enough to form an existential threat to the organization as a whole, your instincts are probably going to take you in the wrong direction because you're almost certainly facing one of those transitions that require you to step back and say, I'm not going to rush into what I would have done 6 months ago. I need to really think about this from first principles.
So you're saying don't necessarily follow your instincts. Your instincts may get you into trouble, is what you're saying.
When you're facing an existential crisis, if we get this wrong, our lights could be out, then your instincts are much, much more likely to do you wrong than if it's a problem, but hey, we'll live. Your instincts are probably going to be the right thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other challenge that I found too, Les, in going through that is just people. Your relationships with people change from the fun stage to the predictable success stage as you go through Whitewater, because the systems and procedures are going to change the relationships. And so I find sometimes one of the reasons that I think we sometimes hold back going through that exercise of the procedures and systems is my friends are in the fun stage and they're going to be upset, or they are upset that we're changing. So,
yeah, it's an unfortunate truth, which I want to make sure we don't end our discussion on a down point. But I can't back away from this. I have never seen any leadership team ever come into Whitewater, make the decision that they're going to go through it to the other side to predictable success without losing one or more members of the team, because as Jim Collins puts it, by the time we've got to late fun, just before we hit Whitewater, we have all the right people on the right seats in the bus. And you've heard me say this before, David. What happens when you go into Whitewater is like going and taking your bus into a tunnel. The thing that comes out the other end, it's not only not the same, but it's not a bus anymore. It's a different vehicle. And some people won't want to go on that journey. And that's fine. There's no negative, bad thing about that. They just want to work in a fun environment. As a leadership group, you've decided that's not where you're going to go. And the best thing you have to do is let that happen and stay friends, right?
Yeah. Les, thank you for the conversation. I love what you have created and what you put words to for us. And I think it's a huge help to organizations, whether it be a business or a church or really any organization. So appreciate you very much. And thank you for talking with us today and guiding us. And you're accessible, right? So if people just look up Predictable Success, they're going to be able to find you and connect with you.
I'm right there. My email address is right on the website. I answer them all. My dog doesn't do email yet, so I have to answer everything.
And I do think it's fun because I will tell people you have been in a situation where you've been through the whole arc and at least on the top side of it, and you've chosen to go back into fun. And so there's nothing wrong with making that choice. You just have to be comfortable with what that actually means for you. But it's fun to see you as a living model of that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Les, thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I wonder if after that conversation, you are asking yourself, where is my organization? Where is my team on this life cycle? Because that's exactly what my team has been working through, and it is giving us common language to process. Personally, we've noticed that we're in Whitewater as a team, and it was so helpful to hear Les mention to David that if you're in fun, if you're moving through that life cycle, that you need to learn to say no and probably start adapting process. Personally, that's exactly where our team is. We are adopting process, and I wonder where you are. Again, I hope this episode allows you and your team to start having a rich conversation, understanding that life cycle, and naming where you are. Like we mentioned before, the summit is so close, and I wonder if you've actually considered bringing your team. Imagine what it could look like to give your team the gift of attending a local host site or watching online to be inspired and equipped in your leadership. We know that when teams attend the summit online or at a local host site, they leave ready to tackle the problems in front of them renewed and re-energized. Make sure to check out globalleadership.org/summit for your lowest price ticket for you and your team today. That's it. Thanks for joining us again. I am so glad that you're a part of this community because when the leader gets better, everyone wins.